The question of Geula, the Sicha, wanted to mention that tonight is the Yom. Anyone know what the Yom is about tonight? It's Hanukkah. But I'm asking what is the Chassidus Yom tonight? The Chassidus Yom is that when the Alter Rebbe went out of jail in Yitzhak Kislev, he 2 years later he was arrested again. They tried again. They made a new false accusation, and they arrested the Alter Rebbe a second time. And when did it happen? The same time of the year. It was right after Sicha. And the Alter Rebbe went out of jail again. Thank you. But he went out of jail not on Yitzhak Kislev. This time he went out of jail in Hanukkah. When did he go out of jail? On the third night of Hanukkah. When we talk about the third night of Hanukkah in Yiddish, we call it the Dritte Lichtung. We go by the candle. So we say it was the third candle that he went out, the third day of Hanukkah. But as usual, you find another source that says, no, that was the fifth day of Hanukkah, the fifth candle. There was always a question, why do we say the third candle and why do we say the fifth candle? Growing up, I always heard that when the Alter Rebbe was arrested, he also arrested a few Chassidim. When the Alter Rebbe went out on the third candle, but the Chassidim that were arrested went out 2 days later, the day of the fifth candle. That's why we have both dates. However, somebody asked the Rebbe this question, and the Rebbe gave a different answer. The Rebbe said both dates are connected to the Alter Rebbe, which means that obviously when he went out of jail, there must have been some details that he wasn't released completely until the fifth day of Hanukkah. So this is similar to Yitzhak Kislev. We know the Alter Rebbe went out of jail. Thank you very much. On Yitzhak Kislev, and you know that I can use it. What if I don't know? I think it's not going to work. First of all, the Alter Rebbe was told on Yitzhak Kislev that he's free, and he went out of jail. But he wasn't totally free until Chav Kislev, the second day. Because for 3 hours he was held hostage in the home of somebody who was very hostile and harassing and was, the Rebbe said those 3 hours in the home of this person was worse than all the 53 days that he was in the jail. So therefore we celebrate 2 days, the 19th and the 20th. When it comes to Yud Beis Tammuz, we also celebrate 2 days, the 12th day of Tammuz, the Friedrich Rebbe went out of jail, and the 13th. Why both days? Because he was informed on the 12th day of Tammuz that he's going out of jail. But he was also informed that it's a legal holiday and they can't give him the necessary legal documents. He has to wait 1 more day to get the legal document that he can go out of jail. So we celebrate 2 days. But it means that on both days something happened that led to his total release. So apparently when Alter Rebbe went out of jail the second time, there was also 2 stages. The first part of it happened on the 3rd day of Hanukkah, and the second part, where he went completely out of jail, was on the 5th day of Hanukkah. That's how the Rebbe explained. There's just a few details about the second time the Alter Rebbe was arrested. Number one, the Alter Rebbe was arrested the second time was not as harsh as the first. First time he was arrested, I told you the story, he was arrested in a black coach. Which means that he's being accused of treason and very serious crimes. And the people that were put the Alter Rebbe were soldiers who had open swords. It was a very frightening scene just to see these soldiers with their swords and the black coach. The second time the Alter Rebbe was arrested was in a much more respectful way. He was able to go with family members, and he was allowed to stop off to rest. And it was done in the normal fashion, not with the soldiers with drawn swords. But amongst the story that happened the second time was the story that happened with the Tsar. The first Tsar, his name was Alexander. And it says in the Sicha that he was actually more of a good-natured person. And he was a person that he actually appreciated doing things in a way of just. Later he became worse for the Jewish people. But initially, and even then, he was still more or less a person who was who followed the right path. The second czar, he was called Nicholas. He was a real Russia. He was a sadist. He was a very hateful person, and a person who was sadistic. He just, by nature, he always carried a whip around him and always either whipped people or threatened to whip them. That's what he enjoyed doing. He became the second czar. The Alter Rebbe was in jail, so he was being, escorted through the palace there. The Alter Rebbe saw him, and he picked up his whip to sort of threaten the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe looked at him, and this is a child that was so hard and tough that he never had any kind of fears of anything. And the Alter Rebbe looked at him, he suddenly lowered his eyes, put down his whip, and later when he spoke to, I guess, whoever it was, his mentor, he told him when that man looked at him, something happened that he had a certain fear in him that he never felt before. So Tzedek said, this was the czar that instituted the gezerah of the Kantonistic. The story that the czar made that they should take little children away from their parents and bring them into the army. Unfortunately, lasted for 25 years with thousands of kids were taken away from their parents by force and sent to the army. And the official reason was because to have a good army, you need to train kids from a very young age. But the real reason was because he was a big anti-Semite, and he wanted to use the opportunity to force these children to convert to Christianity. I don't know what I'm doing, but anyway. I blocked myself. It was blocking me, so I pressed it. The Zoom was on, and maybe it's still on. Right, maybe just I tried to X something. Me and computers don't always get along. Wow. He must be from the future, not from the old generation. Anyway, so he was the one that made this gezerah. And Alter Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek said that he had so much evil in him that when the Alter Rebbe looked at him, it broke to a certain extent the klipa in this person, the evil in this person. And that prevented that as much evil as he did, it would have been much worse had he not had this experience that Alter Rebbe looked at him. And we find stories in Gemara with tzaddikim that just by looking at something, either they were able to heal it, or looking at a wicked person, they destroyed him just with and that's what happened with the Alter Rebbe and this person when he came to the jail. So another thing to point out about the Alter Rebbe being in jail was that even in the jail itself, the Alter Rebbe was in a more respectful way. He wasn't in jail like the jail before. And in fact, they gave the Alter Rebbe permission to have people come to the jail, and everything was done in a respectful way, in that way. Now, the second czar was, I mentioned this guy Alexander, who actually he was the one who actually gave the verdict that Alter Rebbe could be freed from jail. And it said that he just went into power, and he wanted to get people to like him. He knew that the Jews had three groups amongst them. One group was the Hasidim, one group were the religious Jews who were against Hasidim, and the third group was the Enlightenment movement, who wanted things to be more modern and more progressive and be assimilate with the rest of the country. So he wanted to make all the three groups happy. What he did was the first document that he signed as a king was the Alter Rebbe should go free. And then he also signed a document for the other group who came from Vilna, that he's giving them a gift of 3,000 ruble, an enormous sum of money in those days, and they could use it as they wish. And the Maskilim, the people in Enlightenment movement, what did he give them? He gave them the greatest gift that they were hoping for, that Jewish children should have the schus to learn in non-Jewish schools. and non-Jewish universities. That's what they wanted, because to them that was the height of of everything, unfortunately. But that's when the Alter Rebbe went out of jail. Nevertheless, he gave a part of the verdict was the Alter Rebbe should be living in a place which is closer to him. We can have more of a watch on the Alter Rebbe. So that's when the Alter Rebbe moved from his city, which was called Lajna, and moved to another city called Lavdi. And in fact, there was a nobleman who was he was the one who owned a lot of cities, a lot of villages, a lot of forests in that area. And he saw the honor that Alter Rebbe was getting, how thousands of people came to see him, and people came to escort him out of the jail. So he offered that he will build for the Alter Rebbe a city, and not build, make room for the Alter Rebbe in one of his cities that belonged to him. And that's when the Alter Rebbe moved to Ladi. Now, one of the stories that happened when the Alter Rebbe was released from jail, that there was a person who was actually not a chassid, but he helped with the Alter Rebbe going out of jail. And he told the Alter Rebbe that he's doing what the condition. He wants payback. What was the payback? He wanted Alter Rebbe to promise him. Tkiyas kaf means in Torah, when you give a handshake, it's a way of making a commitment. He wanted Alter Rebbe to promise him that he's going to visit 3 of the great Torah leaders in the non-Hasidic community and debate with them about the subject of Hasidus. And Alter Rebbe promised that he would do that. So we have the story of what happened by the different people that Alter Rebbe met. And all of them that the Alter Rebbe came to, they were, in today's language, blown away by the Alter Rebbe. And they actually came out with statements saying the Alter Rebbe is really a great tzaddik. He's an amazing Torah scholar and he should be respected, which had a big impact on how the rest of the community related to the Alter Rebbe. But it's one of the stories that is mentioned more in the Sichas, and I want to mention that story. There was someone called Rabbi Yeshua Tzeitung, and he was a great Torah scholar and also a communal leader among the Jews at the time. And this is one of the 3 people that he wanted them to meet. So he wanted to see from the get-go whether the Alter Rebbe was really such a great tzaddik. And what did he do? He wanted to test the Alter Rebbe. He had somebody working for him, which was not Jewish, but because he grew up among Jews, he spoke a fluent Yiddish, no different than any Jewish kid that grew up in a Jewish family. And when the Alter Rebbe came, he put something down on the table. So he put down on the table fruits or other things to eat. And he also asked this non-Jew to bring wine to the table. If a non-Jew handles wine, a Jew is not allowed to drink it. So if the Alter Rebbe is a tzaddik, a real tzaddik, he'll sense that this is not kosher wine and he won't drink it. If he goes to drink it, that means that he's nobody special. That was his way of testing the Alter Rebbe. Now he was a religious Jew. He wasn't going to make the Alter Rebbe bring something that's treif, or even make a bracha that's not kosher. His plan was if the Alter Rebbe is going to drink it and say Baruch Atah, he would stop him and say, sorry, it's not kosher. But at least I'll have his proof the Alter Rebbe is not a tzaddik. What happened was, put it out on the table, and the Alter Rebbe wouldn't know that it's a non-Jew because he speaks fluent Yiddish. He would think he's like anybody else in the house. The Alter Rebbe started to make the bracha, and his plan was to stop him. But when the Alter Rebbe said Baruch Atah, his face changed. His whole being was transformed. He never in his life saw a person make a bracha, and this happened. So he was so distracted and caught off guard, he forgot that he has to stop him. And the Alter Rebbe continued with the bracha. He said, Hashem, Elokeinu, Melech, Ha'olam. But instead of saying Bora Pri Hagafen, he said, Shahakol Niyah B'dvaro. And he drank it. And he's looking at the Alter Rebbe. Why is he making Shahakol? The Alter Rebbe said to him, by the way, this is not wine. it's honey wine, and you make a bracha shahakol on honey wine. But at the same time, you now made a shaila to all the wine in your cellar because the non-Jew went down there. You don't know what he did touch, what he didn't touch. So we saw right away the Alter Rebbe is not an ordinary person. Not only that he sensed that this was from a Jew, a non-Jew, but he realized that it wasn't Hashem made it should be a regular drink, not wine. And he later asked the Alter Rebbe questions in Torah, and he became one of the Alter Rebbe's supporters.
So the wine turned into.
No, the guy made a mistake. Instead of bringing wine, he brought something which was also in the cellar, but it was honey wine. And honey wine, you make shackle, so it's no shaila.
Oh.
And the interesting thing is when the Alter Rebbe went out of jail, the first, really, when you go out of jail, especially if your life was in danger, you're supposed to have a big celebration. Thank Hashem. The first time, there wasn't such a celebration. But the second time, after Alter Rebbe went out of jail, the second time, then they had a celebration. And they describe a little bit what the celebration was like. Without not everybody was part of it. They only selected people they allowed to be in there. But one of the things that's pointed out is that the Tzemach Tzedek, who was a young child at the time, maybe this was after the first time. I have to check when exactly it happened. But when the Tzemach Tzedek was a young child, and maybe this was after the first time, he took the Tanyas and he announced that we're going to do Hakafis now with the Tanya. And he ordered people to say Ataresa. And then he started to honor people. You go with the first Hakafis, so people took the Tanya. It was dancing as if it was Simchas Torah. He told the Alter Rebbe about it later. The Alter Rebbe smiled. And he said to call in Tzemach Tzedek. When he called him in, Tzemach Tzedek, he put his hands on his head and he gave him a bracha. And he said, what you did was the right thing, because the Tanya is like Torah Shebeksav, it's like the written Torah of Chassidus. In other words, everything there contains everything in Chassidus, just like the Chumash contains everything in Torah, this contains everything of Chassidus. And he gave him a bracha that you should merit to be one of those people that will teach the oral Torah of Chassidus, meaning to give and elaborate and explain different things that come out of Tanya. Okay, so that's tonight. And being that we like to celebrate, so we'll also celebrate the fifth night of Hanukkah, both. But if you ever hear people talk about the third liftel, the fifth liftel, that's what it is. This is the day. I just got a phone call this morning. Someone called me up and says he has a relative who lives in Puerto Rico, and he wants to know why do we celebrate the fifth night of Hanukkah. Well, this is the story. After Rabbi went out of jail the second time. Okay, we were doing the Sicha Mishpatim, Tavshin and Beis. I do have an extra copy here if somebody needs. I think Adi, you're probably the only one that wasn't here last time. So you can take this copy.
Anything else?
So this is the Sicha where the Rebbe talks about what happened in America, United States of America.
Is there an extra one?
This is
Yeah, I can take pictures.
what you can use this one. I'll use. You can use one.
Thank you. I'm just gonna take pictures of this one over there. Thank you.
Where we finished off was on page 173. Let me just remind you what we did, and where we go from there. First of all, the Rebbe said that the fact that the United States of America and Russia made this decision and this announcement that we're going to enter a new era, an era of peace, and there won't be any wars, and we'll resolve all issues through peaceful negotiations. And not only that, but we're going to destroy the weapons that we already have, and definitely destroy, not manufacture new weapons, especially weapons of mass destruction. And what are we going to do with the money? Instead, we'll use it for enhancing and improving the economic situation in the country. The Rebbe said this is not an ordinary, political, beautiful, nice change. This is actually the beginning of a fulfillment of a prophecy related to Moshiach. And it says that swords will be turned into plowshares. That was point number one. Point number two was that there's another thing about this prophecy, that it says that who will be the one to make it happen is Mashiach. And being that we see it starting to happen, which means that we're already seeing Mashiach's impact on the nations of the world. That's how more advanced we are. Which means basically not only Mashiach is already here, but he's already impacting the world. Then the third part of the Sicha is that we can actually see by observing and analyzing the time that it happened and the place that it happened, we can see more the association with Mashiach. So first the Rebbe goes into the place, and then he'll go into the time. What does it mean? What can we see by the place that it happened? So the Rebbe says that it happened in the city of New York, even though we're talking about the President of the United States, and this place is in the capital, but this particular meeting and this particular declaration came when he was in New York City. And what do we see? What's New York City? Ask somebody, what's New York City? They, oh, New York City, that's where 770 is. That's New York City. That's where we have the shul of Nasi Reinu, the Nasi of the generation. And this is the place that made the changes in the world, preparing the world for Mashiach. And when we had this class, which was Wednesday, we went into the details, how it's all about coming to the lower place of the globe. And this became actually, all the years, there was no Yiddishkeit in this part of the world. And now, not only there's Torah and mitzvahs and even Chassidus, but this has become the source of the place which is spreading Torah and Chassidus to the whole world. In other words, other places in the world which had Torah and Yiddishkeit for generations and centuries, now they're benefiting by the fact that Chassidus is being spread from here to there. And being that spreading Chassidus, this is all connected to Mashiach. So therefore, the fact that this is taking place in this city is where we can see how it's related to Mashiach. When you learn the Sicha on the surface, of course, people will say, come on, what are you telling me? Just because it happened in New York, that doesn't prove anything. A lot of things happen in New York. That's where the United Nations is. It's in New York. It's not proof. And by the way, there's more Sichas like this. The Rebbe says, look at what's happening here. Look what's happening. The Rebbe is not proving anything from these things that happen. So what is the Rebbe doing? Why are we pointing out to these things? Like even now, when we talk about October 7th, and look, people are changing, this proves it's not about proof. We're making a mistake. What's the mistake? The mistake is that the basis for the belief that Mashiach is coming imminently is not from this happening or that happening, the other thing happening. From our perspective, it's based on mainly one thing, the fact that the Rebbe, who is a tzaddik, who has perception of things that are going on spiritually, informed us that Mashiach is coming and is coming imminent, and we should spread this to the world. That's the basis. So why is it necessary to point all to these other things? What do they add? What it adds is that we're able to see Mashiach's coming in a more visual way. I want to explain something, and when we explain that, you'll understand this. There's a chapter in Tanya, chapter 41 and 42, where the Alter Rebbe speaks about a story that happened in Gemara with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And before he passed away, his students were standing around his bed, and they said to him, please give us a bracha. Like this is like they're seeing this, the end is coming, to give them a bracha that there's going to give them the strength for the future. So he says, I'm giving you a bracha You should have fear of Hashem like you're afraid of people. And they were like in shock. That's the bracha. Our fear of Hashem should be the way I'm afraid of another person. Our fear of Hashem should be so much greater than the fear that I have of other people. So he said to them, but you see that when a person knows that another person is watching him, they will refrain from doing things. And that's the bracha. How does Alter Rebbe explain it? Explains it like this. If you ask, the Alter Rebbe doesn't say these words, but I'm explaining it. If you would ask the average Frum Jew, stop anybody on the street that's a Frum Jew, whether it's Chabad or any other Jew in the world, talking about really seriously Frum. Do you believe in Hashem? Good question. Of course I believe in Hashem. Do you believe Hashem sees everything? Yeah. Do you believe He sees everything you do? Yeah. Now be honest with me. Are there things that if another person would be watching you, you might not have done it? If he's honest, I'll say, yeah, of course. I'm human. Sometimes I lose my temper. Sometimes I speak Lashon Hara. I do things. But if somebody would be watching me, especially if that somebody would be a person who is a little bit of more prominence, someone that I respect, look up to, I would be embarrassed to do it in front of that person. I wouldn't do it. So then tell me, if you believe that Hashem is watching everything you do, and you're also telling me that there's certain things you would never do if people were watching you, so why do you do it if Hashem is watching you? And the answer is not that I don't believe. I do believe. So what's the answer? What?
You don't feel it, like one person you are.
Right. When you see a person, a human being with two eyes looking at you, it's a different reality. Knowing that Hashem is watching me, even though I believe it, but it's not the same reality like something I can see with my eyes. So the Alter Rebbe asked, if that's the case, how could he give them, and that's what the bracha that he gave them. Not just that you should fear Hashem like you fear of another person. The reality of Hashem's watching you and presence over you should be so, Hashem's presence should be so real to you, just like something which you see with your physical eyes, as if a king was watching you. And that's a very high level. Without the Rebbe, but how is it possible? It's still not the same. I know, I understand, but it's still not the same. Like physically, visually seeing someone in the room looking at me. The Alter Rebbe says like this: the truth of the matter is, let's say there would be a physical person watching you. What do you see? You see the he gives much for the king. You see the actual king. You see the personality. You see his neshama. What do you see? You see his body. So you're afraid of his nose. What are you afraid of? I'm not talking about fear of punishment. I'm talking about fear of awe, like out of respect. You respect his nose, his chin. What is it that's getting you? It's obviously the neshama. You don't see the neshama, so it should be the same. You don't see the soul. So in general, when you're looking at another person, it sounds like a complicated question about a simple matter. Could I say that I see the person, like I'm looking at you, you're looking at me? Do we see the person? Or no, the person's amuna. What I see is a physical body. But you actually see the person. The Alter Rebbe explains, you see the personality and the person with the eyes of your mind, but it's being transmitted through the eyes of my physical eyes as well. Because I know there's a human being here that I'm talking to that's laughing, that's crying, that's interesting, and a personality. So with the eyes of my mind, I actually see, but the eyes of my mind are being transmitted through the physical eyes of flesh by seeing the body. Is this complicated, or you get what I'm saying? In other words, the personality is being manifested through a physical body. As a result of that, I'm seeing the actual person. What? I want to make it more simple. I wouldn't even bring in the word klipa. I want to bring in just, is it a visual experience when I see another person, or is it a muna?
Both.
What?
Both.
It's a muna that is a person that I'm looking at and talking to?
Not at a level that we perceive.
Right. So I'm saying it's not a muna. I can say that I saw this person, I spoke to this person, we were laughing about something, we were concerned about something. I'm having a communication. It's not a munah, because the personality, even though it's something that neshama is not physical, but it's manifesting through the body, and as a result of that, it makes that experience a visual experience. I understand with my brain that I'm talking to a person. That's called the eyes of the mind. But at the same time, it's being manifested through a physical body. So in a sense, it's a combination of the eyes of the mind and the physical eyes are seeing the body. As a result of that, the whole thing becomes a visual experience. It's not a perfect example, but I remember we always give this example. A little child, never in his life understood that 2 + 2 = 4. It's the first time they're hearing something like so abstract, like arithmetic. And because they don't understand it, you take 2 apples, and now they understand it. So my question is, if 2 + 2 could be understood, what do we need apples for? Why can't I just say 2 + 2 = 4? So you're going to tell me, well, the apples are visual. So the apples are visual, not the concept. How come they can understand the concept after looking at the apples?
It's a concrete and tangible.
Oh, so when I have 2 apples and I'm telling them 2 + 2 = 4, the concept of 2 + 2 = 4 to them becomes visual as a result of that. So when a person knows that Hashem is looking at me, and then and Al Rabbi says in Tanya, imagine when you see the wind blowing and the sun shining, you say, all this is a manifestation of Hashem. If I know it with the eyes of my mind, and then I look at the world and I say, Hashem made everything happen, I could make Hashem become something more visual to me. Like I look at the world as Hashem's body, so to speak, you can use those terms, that Hashem is manifesting through this. So I look outside, the wind is blowing and the trees are shaking back and forth. That's Hashem making it happen. And Hashem becomes to me like something visual. And that's a much more concrete experience than just something which is abstract and spiritual. So when the Rebbe tells us to look at something about Mashiach, look what's happening here in the world, you see an association with Mashiach, it's not proof. What the Rebbe is saying is, I'm letting you know that Mashiach is coming. But look at this and this happening. By looking at it, it's like where you can see a physical manifestation of Mashiach coming, and that makes for us the experience of knowing Mashiach's coming in a more visual way when I look at things that are happening in the world. So in other words, here's the United States president, and here's the president of Russia getting up and making a statement and saying that this is all about turning swords. They're saying we're going to get rid of war and we're going to use the money for economic situations. By the Rebbe giving us an explanation saying what you're watching, what you're observing is really a fulfillment of a prophecy. So on one hand, when the eyes of flesh, I hear 2 leaders of countries speaking. With the eyes of my mind, I understand that this is about Mashiach. But now the imminence of Mashiach and the coming of Mashiach is to me much more visual and more concrete than it was before. Because I'm looking at something which is happening as a result of this Mashiach's closeness. And that's the meaning of the Sicha. If you look at the place where it's happening, and you know that with your knowledge that it's related to Mashiach, it's related to the Nasi of the generation, then when you're looking at what's happening, your feeling of Mashiach's coming closer becomes more visual than it would be without it.
And that's what the bracha was about. So you'll give Hashem a third person, but it would be more visual.
Right. That means that you should be able to start. You look at the world. In other words, you look at the world. We look at the world, and like I said, the Rebbe says you see the wind blowing, you see the sun shining, and let's say the Rebbe says a person could condition himself by keeping to think about this constantly. Hashem just made the wind blow. Hashem made. It's like imagine you're in a room and you hear footsteps. You didn't see anybody, but because you heard footsteps, you realize, oh, somebody was becoming. So if I start associating things happening in the world and realize this is Hashem made the wind blow and Hashem made the sunshine, Hashem made whatever happened, I'm looking at the physical world, but I'm seeing Hashem's in everything, and Hashem becomes to me more visual than before. I once saw an article a college student writes, has nothing to do with Yiddishkeit, just a college student writes that she sold cookies in college. How did she do it? She put down a box. She used to bake cookies and wrote down on top 25 cents a cookie. So she would put down, let's say, 100 cookies in the morning. She came back, the 100 cookies were gone, but there were only 50 quarters, not 100 quarters. Obviously, people took it without putting a quarter in. So one day she decided she's going to change the sign. She wrote the same words, but she made a picture of eyes looking. She came back, there were 75 quarters. Which means just the fact that people saw a pair of eyes looking, even though everyone knows it's a drawing, it's not real, but somehow it made the idea of like maybe somebody's looking a little bit more real to them, and they were uncomfortable just taking it, they put it in a quarter. So that's what it means, that your fear of Hashem could become like the fear of a human if I start associating my awareness of Hashem with physical things that are happening in the world. That makes it more real. You can look at it in Perek, Membeis, and Tanya. That's where it is. Okay. A good Shabbos, everybody. Hanukkah. And again, happy Chag Geula. By the way, Hanukkah is connected to the Yutas Kislev also, because the Alter Rebbe, even though he went out of jail Yutas Kislev, but you don't make the bracha Hagomel until you get home. When did he get home? He got home on Hanukkah, the time to travel. So the first one was connected to Hanukkah, the second one connected to Hanukkah. And is there any connection between Yutas Kislev and Hanukkah? Yes, because the Torah is compared to water, Torah is compared to bread, Torah is compared to wine, and the Torah is compared to oil. And these are all different parts of Torah. The part of Torah that's compared to oil is the Sichas. In fact, there's a Sicha of the Rabbi which was translated in English, and it's called On the Essence of Chassidus. You know that Sicha? It's all about what the connection between oil and Chassidus.
That were,
Wait, the Ani. Yeah, that's the Sicha. That was a landmark Sicha that the Rabbi gave, explained how the same thing can be understood in Pshat, Remer, Drush, Sod, and then Chassidus. But the whole point is how Chassidus is oil, and Chanukah is oil. Why don't we eat latkes on Yutas Kislev? Because then we won't, we have to have an appetite for Chanukah time. Okay, a good Shabbos, a good Yom Tov. And the next class should be in Yerushalayim.
Moshiach. Amen. Rushing home, we were rushing to them, pick the seven, go home, get my barbecue food together, bring it over, and I'll call you on the way over, so I can drop off and